Hello, my name's Tim Shoebridge. That was the sound of my latest user oscillator for the Korg Minilogue XD, Prologue and NTS-1. The oscillator is called Octave, and here's another example of the kind of sounds that you can make with it. Now, before I get into the details of this oscillator and give you a walkthrough of it to show you how it works and what the parameters are that you can set, I thought I might just give you a little bit of a background to my thinking when I came to develop it. Now, I was actually thinking about this oscillator when I was developing another one, and that other one is called 3, and I developed that a few months ago. Now, what 3 can do is, when you hold down a note, it actually plays 3 waveforms. And those waveforms can have different pitches and can be played at different times to give kind of like a delay effect. Now with 3, you specify what those pitches are yourself up front, and you also specify what the delay is. So what you end up getting is some very interesting sort of arpeggio effects with it, but it's very predictable in terms of the output. And what I was really interested in trying to achieve with 3 was a little bit more unpredictability. So that's what Octave is. Octave is based on 3, but gives you some unpredictability in terms of the sounds that it creates. It's unpredictable in terms of the pitches that it chooses to play, and it's also unpredictable in terms of the delays it chooses to implement. So I'll go through the oscillator in some more detail, give you a walkthrough so you can understand what I'm talking about. But before we get there, here's just one more example of the kind of sounds that it can make. Right, so just like with the 3 oscillator, there is a choice of waveforms with Octave. There's 4 different waveforms you can choose: sine, triangle, sawtooth, and square wave. Now with Octave, they are available with the shape control. So between 0 and 25%, we get a sine wave. Then from 25 to 50%, we get a triangle. Then the saw, and then the square wave. Right, so what you're hearing when I hold down a key is one of 2 notes. Either the note that I'm holding down, or exactly one octave above it. Which one is being played is being chosen at random by the oscillator. Now you can change this oscillator spread. Currently it's 1 octave, but you can change it to be 1 octave up and down, 2 octaves up, 1 octave down, 2 octaves up, 2 octaves down, etc. And you can do that with a parameter. This one here called octaves. So at the moment it's set to 1, so 1 octave spread. If I change it to 2, now it'll go up or down by 1 octave. at random. 3, 4, 5, etc. Now, in terms of how quickly these notes are being repeated, there is a parameter for that as well. I've called it space because it's determining how spaced out the notes are. Now, what you're hearing right now is not sort of like to any clock. It's random, but at a certain kind of speed, and that's what this control will change. So if I go down to minimum 0, that's as fast as it goes, and as I increase the value, the more spaced out the repeats are. But they're still random. They could be fast, they could be slow, but the space has been increased by this parameter. Now, right down at the minimum, it is actually, or seems to be, following a clock. That's because the room for random choice of timing has been squashed right down to 0. And what's determining how fast that is not an internal clock for the oscillator, but it's actually an envelope, because every sound you're hearing follows an envelope, an attack and a decay portion. So in terms of the envelopes themselves, what we're hearing right now is a fast attack and quite a fast, but a little bit of a decay going on there. And we can change both the attack and the decay with parameters. So here's the attack. And the decay. So you hear there that the speed of the repeats slows down when I add a decay or an attack to the envelope. And that's because I've chosen that the envelope cycle itself can't be interrupted. So it will never repeat until the attack and the decay phase of the envelope has completed. So that attack and decay phase determines the minimum repeat length, the fastest that it will actually repeat. So I turn these down to 0. That's as fast as it goes. And let's make the space 0. There you go. So the minimum repeat is time for the envelope to complete its cycle plus the space parameter from 0 to about 8 seconds in terms of that sort of like space for random choice of repeat. So if we want to have overlapping sounds, then what we need to do is add more voices, because at the moment there's only one waveform generator playing whenever I hit a note. Number of voices is 1. That's not the voices on the synth, that's the voices inside my oscillator. It's set to 1 waveform generator. And we can go up to a maximum of 3. And now we'll get overlapping sounds. Okay, so that's it. It's really quite a simple user oscillator in terms of the parameters that you can set. And it really does lend itself to ambient and atmospheric kind of presets. Now there's just one more thing that I want to explain about this user oscillator, which I didn't cover in the walkthrough, and that is how the user oscillator reacts to modulation. Now you can modulate the shape using the LFO, but I didn't implement any modulation of the shape in this user oscillator, and that's because the shape control is used to switch between the waveforms, and it didn't make any sense for you to be able to sort of like automate that. However, when it comes to pitch modulation, well, that's where we have something different with this user oscillator, and the way it reacts to pitch modulation is really quite unique. Now, normally with a synthesizer, if you were to say modulate the pitch with an LFO, you'd get a smooth transition in pitch while you're hearing the sounds from the synthesizer. The way that this user oscillator reacts to pitch is, in terms of when a sound is triggered, it will use whatever the pitch of the synthesizer is, but once that sound is triggered, it will be constant pitch thereafter. So if you've got the user oscillator triggering and re-triggering, and you've got pitch modulation going on, then what you'll find is that each of those notes will be triggered at different pitches, but then the pitches will be constant thereafter. It's difficult for me to explain, but better if I just show you or play you an example, which is going to be the last example that I show you just now. What I've done with this particular preset is I'm really very subtly modulating the pitch, just very, very slightly up and down. And as the sort of like the sounds are re-triggering, you're going to get this sort of really quite subtle detune effect. A little bit unnerving, actually. It's a bit of sort of like a horror movie score kind of preset, this one. And that is the effect that you can get. Obviously, you can be more drastic with it, but this is a kind of a quite subtle detune effect that you can get. So that's what's coming up next. I really do hope you've enjoyed this video. As always, thank you very, very much for watching.